Good afternoon, everyone. Such a pleasure to be here with you all at COP27, where so many great minds are convening at a time when climate action has never been more important. My name is Evan Raskin, and I'm the National Campaign Manager for EarthDay.org. We're the global organizers of Earth Day on April 22nd and environmental action throughout the calendar year. I want to thank all of the organizations and administrations that are participating in this event. Your work embodies the vision we spread through our Green Cities program, which recognizes that local officials are among the most significant decision makers when it comes to taking action on the land, air, water, and climate that we all depend on. The UNFCCC shares this recognition in their statement that the process to take stock of our progress on the Paris Agreement and implement solutions should be driven by local leaders. To maximize the impact of this process, we encourage officials to rally for Earth Day, April 22nd, to advance local-level climate plans in time to make significant progress by COP28. Earth Day has been a catalyst for environmental action for over half a century, providing a framework for stakeholders of all backgrounds to unite, not only on April 22nd itself, but throughout the calendar year. Institutions reflect on the progress that they have made during Earth Day and use this moment to galvanize further action and accelerate their sustainability plans in the coming year. This is precisely what the global community hopes to accomplish through COP27. During this conference, we are going to be taking a look at what we can do to better address the goals that were laid out through the Paris Agreement, in which the world committed to achieving net zero emissions, building resilience to extreme weather, and cooperating at all levels to mitigate the impacts of climate change. During this conference, we must take stock on how far we have come in achieving these goals and adapt our plans accordingly to stay on track for the sustainable and equitable future that we all envision. The world cannot wait to see what we accomplish here. Time is running out to limit climate change to 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming by the end of the century. The latest reports reveal that the current level of action is insufficient to reach these goals. In the last year since COP26, only 24 parties to the Paris Agreement have submitted or updated new nationally determined contributions. As we return to our home countries following this conference, we need to turn the momentum built here into real action, anchored by key moments to keep ourselves on track for real progress by COP28. 6 months from now, on April 22nd, Earth Day will be that galvanizing moment for institutions to accelerate their climate responses. This year's theme for Earth Day is perhaps my favorite that I've seen during my time with the organization. Our work for 2023 rallies around the theme of Invest in Our Planet, which focuses on how stakeholders of all backgrounds can unite to dedicate their time, resources, and effort through their unique role in society to advance sustainable development. This theme recognizes that climate action is not only a benefit to environmental protection and abstract, but is indeed the best path forward to prosperity, to create investments in a stronger future for our families, for our communities, for our businesses, for our cities, for our countries, and for our planet. The institutions who made these investments early and often are already seeing the returns, benefiting from modern infrastructure that mitigates pollution while also saving millions of dollars. They are now living proof that sustainability is not just a matter of survival, but indeed the best path forward for a prosperous and thriving human civilization. I am proud to be here today with an incredible panel of local elected officials who have already begun the process of making these investments and have been a leader for years through their involvement with organizations such as ICLEI. I am so excited to be able to be here with all of you today. I can't wait to hear what you contribute and discuss today on our panel. And before we begin, I would love to welcome Lauren Faber-O'Connor to the stage, the Chief Sustainability Officer for the City of Los Angeles, to give us an overview of how her city is investing in our planet and set the stage for this dynamic conversation. Lauren, the microphone is yours.
Thank you, Evan. Thanks so much for the opportunity to come kick us off here. And congratulations on your work with Earth Day, because I was thinking about it as you were talking. Anyone, certainly in any city, who celebrates Earth Day, you've got quite a big ROI because no one actually celebrates Earth Day anymore. It's always Earth Week, it's Earth Month. So, you know, you're like leveraging a 10x, you know, on an Earth Day here. So it's clearly you're doing something right. And I am honestly, you know, very excited to just be part of this for a second. That you have incredible local leaders here. So I'm just going to kind of serve, and they'll bump, set, and spike on this side. But, you know, cities are truly, it's been such a pleasure to be in the city of Los Angeles working for Mayor Garcetti for the last going on 8 years, because even though I've been working on climate change my entire career, it really came home to me that cities are truly leaders when it comes to fighting climate change. But it's kind of because we have to be, because we are on the front lines of, you know, the impacts that, Evan, you are walking us through. I mean, in California, we don't even have a fire season anymore. You know, this is all year long. We have to be prepared to address not only the emergency management of fires, but then the localized air pollution events that we face as a result of those fires. Drought is just a California conservation way of life. It's not seasonal anymore. It's not annual. And floods, wildfires, freak ice storms, you know, these are things that are unfortunately the norms that we are feeling and facing and protecting our residents from on a regular basis now. It's no longer just talking about it. And a city like Los Angeles depends on partners across the country like the ones you're going to hear from today, because we can do what we, you know, maybe think of to do, but we actually really depend on the best ideas coming from others, and we hope that others want to work with us on some of our ideas, and you certainly have that in the panel that you have today. Just a quick note about Los Angeles. So in 2019, the mayor upped our sustainability goal. We review it every 4 years and up our goals, because something that you do now that feels like a big stretch, 4 years later, I got to tell you, is like, oh, wow. That wasn't, we gotta up our game a little bit, and that's gonna keep happening. You have to revisit your ambition regularly. But we wanted to make sure that we were, you know, adhering to the goals of the Paris Climate Agreement, and so we had to review our goals, and, you know, we're really considered one of the first mega cities to develop a clear emission reduction pathway that is in alignment with that, and we characterize it through what we call the 5 zeros. A zero carbon grid. We own and operate the largest municipal electric and water utility in the country. So a zero carbon grid, zero carbon transportation, zero carbon buildings, zero waste, and zero wasted water. And across all of those pillars, you know, we ensure that we're threading equity and resilience across each of those, and have very clear near-term, medium-term, and long-term goals across the 5 zeros. And the other key part of that is, so ambition, that's thing one. Equity, as I mentioned, thing two. Ensuring that everyone has an opportunity to join the green economy. How are we engaging workforce? And how are we walking the walk with our own municipal action? And part of that includes partnership and the work that we do with other cities. And so I'm gonna leave it there so you can hear from the leaders themselves, who are all leaders in climate mayors, leaders in ICLEI, who truly depend on each other to lift each other up, to steal from each other, and to think of how can we get into some good trouble together on climate and really show the world that the U.S. means business when it comes to acting on climate. So I'll leave it there and hand it back. Is it to you, Evan? And really looking forward to hearing from all of you.
Thank you so much, Lauren, for walking us through such an ambitious plan to bring Los Angeles to the forefront of climate action. It sounds like plans are well underway, and the concept of 5 zeros, I think that's something that we can really resonate as the world moves towards a collective zero on carbon emissions. After hearing you speak, I believe that it is incredibly clear, if it wasn't before, that local leaders really are the best equipped to be able to implement climate initiatives in their community. The capacity that you have as local leaders to be able to be in that position, to take action, to build a happy, healthy, and wealthy future for your constituents. The power truly is in your hands, and I cannot look more forward to the discussion that we'll have here today. I am proud to welcome to the stage our moderator to guide today's conversation, Dan Stiles, the strategic and personal counsel to Al Gore and the Climate Reality Project, and ICLEI board member. To Dan and our esteemed panelists, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Evan. It's great to be here with you all today, and I do hope that we can get into maybe a little bit of good trouble. I love that, so let's see if we can get into some good trouble in our conversation today. I'm going to begin first with something that I think is important to acknowledge in climate change, and that it's a personal issue to each one of us. In the different ways that we're working on it, it's still a personal issue. So climate change, to me, as a person who's happiest when he's on his skis, in the backcountry on snowshoes, with the natural snow falling, that's what climate change is to me. It's the disappearing snow. It's the shorter winters. That is what got me involved. That's something that I want to protect and that I love. Climate change in Colorado and the Rocky Mountains isn't just about skiing and outdoor adventuring, it's also about water. We're at the headwaters of 8 major river basins in Colorado that feeds water across the western United States and into Mexico. Our work at the local government level is rooted in the stories of real people, real work, and real communities. Today, at this implementation COP and on Energy Day, we're going to listen to the stories of leaders who will inspire you and their work implementing solutions in their communities, including how they will accelerate a swift and just renewable energy transition. The Inflation Reduction Act provisions will allow the U.S. to drastically reduce emissions to 40% below 2005 levels by 2030. This will set the country on the right path to reach the commitment in the nationally determined contributions by a 50 to 52% reduction overall. Collaboration across local governments, cities, and towns, working with their countries, states, and nations, is the best way to achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement. Cities and regions are now recognized as official contributors to the global stocktake process, as we heard a little bit earlier, occurring this year and next year. And the UNFCCC has announced that the stocktake should be a local level process. With over 1,000 cities, towns, and counties around the globe, ICLEI provides resources and technical guidance to help local governments reach their goals and connects leaders to share solutions and accelerate progress. ICLEI is the focal point for the local government and municipal authorities major group, bringing the voices of local leaders to global climate change. And so we are here today to answer 3 questions at a high level. Where we are, what plans and actions are underway to implement your community's climate plan, particularly on Energy Day with respect to renewable energy. Where do we want to go? What is the climate vision toward 2030 for your community? And lastly, how do we get there by following a climate-just path, ensuring that no one is left behind? Let's get our panel discussion going and get into a little bit of trouble. We're honored to be joined today by Mayor Libby Schaaf from the City of Oakland, California, Commissioner Bridget Shea, Travis County, Texas, Mayor Frank County from Des Moines, Iowa, and Rob Werner, who's representative from City Council in Concord, New Hampshire. Thank you all very much for being here today. So my first question, what I will ask you to do is perhaps start with your personal connection to climate change, and then we're going to get right into the weeds. So the first question today, Commissioner Shea, we came to COP27 with the understanding that the world is not on track to secure a 1.5 degree future. Can you start by telling us a little bit about your personal connection to climate change, your community, and what it means to you to drastically step up ambition for the Paris Agreement?
Thanks so much, Dan, and thanks to Evan and the Earth Day folks for organizing this. My personal involvement happened back in 1988, so half of you weren't even born yet. But it was when Dr. James Hansen, who at the time was the head of the NASA, the Goddard Space Institute at NASA, where they were studying planetary effects, testified to Congress. And his testimony was a front-page story in the New York Times. I had been working as a reporter, and at the time I was the National Press Secretary for the old SANE and Ban the Nuclear Weapons Freeze campaign, again, before Heavy were born. And it was clear from reading that story that this was the most urgent crisis facing the world. And I literally called friends and said, did you see the story? We have to drop what we're doing now and work on this, or we can measure our coffins and get in. And I dropped what I was doing and I moved to Texas to work on this issue. And after spending 35 years in Texas organizing around climate change in the oil and gas capital of the country, I've earned my stripes. But the other thing that really motivated me at a personal level to kind of recommit on this was just thinking about the future that my children would inherit, and all children on the planet. And I just realized I have to do whatever I can to continue fighting to stop this, and to also prepare people for it, because I feel like this was back in 2012, 2013. I felt like leaders weren't being honest with people about how bad it was going to get and how much we had to change what we were doing in order to reverse climate change. And that's really what kind of got me into play on it. Austin, Texas is one of the fastest growing metro areas in the country. We had been known for live music and tacos and a really great laid-back Willie Nelson-style culture. And I think what we'll be known for in the future is we're going to run out of water, and we're going to get so hot that humans can't really manage to live there any longer. And so people will have to leave and move north. And that's true for most of the southern United States and the western states as well. So that's the reality that we're looking at down the road, perhaps in my children's lifetime, maybe sooner. And that's the other thing that motivates me. We have got to do more, both to fight to reverse climate change and to prepare people for the impacts of it.
Well, Bridget, that was a good way to lead off to us, because your scientist was a graduate of the University of Iowa, and so I had a lot of opportunities to speak with him. But I got to tell you, climate change, I didn't notice or think about early in my life or in my career. Spring, summer, fall, winter, then back around the spring, we would, go through life. And I remember in 1993, one of my other lives, we had a family-owned business that had started in actually 1888. And in 1993, our factory that we'd been in that particular building since 1907 flooded. We saw what was a 500-year flood event. And I remember my dad saying, you better do something. I'm feeling bad about this. I said, well, has this happened before? And he said, never. He said, you better get all of our stuff off the first floor. I think we're going to flood. And he was right. Since then, I got into office. 2003, we had another event. 2008, we had another 500-year event. 2010, we had 3 more 500-year events, or near there. And in 2018, on June 30th, we had just this interesting storm that dumped 10 inches of rain in parts of Des Moines, Iowa, in about 3.5, 4 hours. And then, in the last 3 years, I've seen 4 derechos. Now, what excited me about it is I started thinking about it in elected office. I thought, what can we do about it? What can we as a city do, and how should we try to lead the way? Well, part of it for us was to plant trees and to look at that, and to hold the soil, to give us a relief from the urban heat island effect and put a canopy over our city. And so for the last 17, 18 years, we've been a Tree City USA. And now we're a tree world. We just finally achieved that status this year. And so we're proud to say we're working on it from that aspect. But we have diligently put together a mayor's task force right after I first got elected in 2004 till today, where we have been bringing community members in and together looking at what we should do in our city, how we should look at how we build our buildings, how we should resiliently try to protect and in the fact after a horrible thing, how do we rebuild resiliently, and look at how we all together as a community look at all those aspects. So my connection really, in amongst all that, by the way, now we're looking at droughts. I mean, here you were talking about Des Moines, we're at the confluence, not at the headwaters like you guys are in Colorado, but we're at the confluence of two pretty good sized rivers with a 10,000 square mile watershed above us that drains into the center of our city, which can be a problem. But I've got to tell you, as we speak right now, we're seeing, I want to say, frighteningly low levels of water in those rivers. So we go from one extreme of unbelievable amounts of water and flooding to now we're looking at drought conditions. So I know that what we have to do, and my engagement in it is changing as these weather patterns are changing. But I've realized since for sure 1993 that what we do in terms of climate is so important, and how we prepare and how we protect our city. So that's a kickoff.
For those of you, test. Yep, oh good. So a personal climate story. You know, I'm born and raised in Oakland, California. So I can't remember a time when I didn't consider myself an environmentalist. But there's a difference between being an environmentalist and recognizing the urgent threat of climate change. And for me, it happened my first year as the mayor of Oakland. I had the incredible privilege of attending the Paris Climate Accords. And I visited exhibitions that showed indigenous communities in Alaska that literally were dying because these were fishing communities and people were falling thin ice when they were out hunting for food and died. And so I was starting to gain this awareness that this is not something that is just threatening endangered species. This is threatening people in our communities right here and now. And while I was in Paris, I got a call from my police chief to tell me about an unbelievably tragic incident that happened in my absence. A young man celebrating his birthday in our park on the shores of Lake Merritt and climbed up a tree that he had been in 1,000,000 times since he was a little child, a strong oak tree. But that day, because this tree had undergone a cycle of drought and then extreme rain, it became stressed and brittle. And the bough of this tree that this boy had climbed on so many times broke and killed him. He died. So I had my first climate death of a citizen of my own city that I was responsible for while I was, hanging out with Al Gore and Leonardo DiCaprio in Paris
And it just brought it home to me how urgent and complex a crisis this is. It is not just happening in small island nations. It is happening in Oakland, California right now.
Thank you. So I attended summer camp in New Hampshire at a very young age, and so we had a culture of really being out in the woods, learning how to be responsible in the woods, and really learning how to be good stewards of the environment. So that was my early experience. But I would say more contemporaneously in New Hampshire, I would say two things, two aspects. Our moose population has really become decimated in the North Country of our state. And it's because we no longer have the traditional long and deep winters. And so what happens is that the moose get a lot of ticks on them. They get so many ticks that particularly juvenile moose cannot survive that. We've lost half of our moose population in New Hampshire. In fact, that's happened in northern New York and throughout northern New England. It's very tragic, but it has gotten people's attention. The other aspect is something, again, that's iconic for New Hampshire, is our maple sugaring industry. It's had quite an impact on production, as what you need for maple syrup production is predictable cycles of cold nights and warmer days, long about March. That was traditional. Now what we're seeing is that it's very unpredictable, and people are making maple syrup at the end of January. And sometimes the quality is not as good as it has been in the past because the sugar content is rising, and you need a lot more syrup, a lot more sap to yield the same amount of syrup. So it not only has a quality impact, has an economic impact on those farmers. So those are real things that have gotten people's attention. So Concord is our state capital. It's a city of about 43,000, third largest population center in our state, which is a state of about 1.4 million people. And people are very community-based. So what we did is, in 2018 is that we, through our city council, I served on the city council for 14 years, from 2007 through 2021. I chaired the energy committee much of that time and continue to chair it for Concord. We enacted unanimously in city council a goal of 100% renewable energy by 2050, electricity by 2030, transportation and thermal by 2050. And that's not just for municipal operations, that's for the entire community. So it is quite a tall order, but we have gotten on the road to those goals. One of the things we did this past year is that we replaced all of our 2,100 street lights to LED lights, and that'll save our taxpayers $600,000 over a 10-year period. We are on the road, hopefully over this next year, by the end of 2023, to be deploying about 14 megawatts of solar within our community. Some to impact our city operations, others, other developments to basically green the grid. New England is all one grid. And so even though we might have a large 10 megawatt solar development in the city that doesn't directly connect to our municipal operations, it's a real benefit because it greens the grid, and we have to do that. So those are some of the initiatives we have. We can talk a bit more about other plans we have.
Evan, are there more mics?
We're going to get some good exercise with one mic here, so bear with us, sorry. Thank you so much for sharing your personal stories and connections to climate change and in your communities. I think that means a lot to this audience, and it helps us really spend a moment in your shoes as we move into the next topic of our conversation. And this question is for each of you, and maybe we'll start at the other end again, if that works okay. So the United States, as I mentioned earlier, has passed an unprecedented level of climate finance. What and how is your community working at the state and federal level to take advantage of this opportunity? Actually, let's start down here with Commissioner Shea, since he's close.
Thanks, Dan. We were really fortunate in Austin, Texas, Travis County, particularly the second round of federal COVID relief funds, because all the funding from the Infrastructure Act hasn't made it down to the local level yet. But the COVID relief money was just invaluable to the community. And one of the real tragedies that's happening, I think, in a lot of American cities is a growing gulf between the very rich and the increasing numbers of very poor. And so Austin has a massive homeless issue. We literally have thousands of people who are homeless living on the streets. And so we dedicated $110 million of the federal relief funds to build housing for people who are chronically homeless, working with community organizations that have a great track record of sort of knitting chronically homeless people back into community. So while it wasn't a direct climate impact, it was a direct COVID impact. The entire economy, people's own personal financial situations were made so much worse by it. But we have a number of initiatives that, again, relate to climate that we're paying for with the federal funds. And I cannot say enough about how the Biden administration has invested in people, in helping to lift up people's lives and improve their lives. And I just think it's profoundly important, and none of us is doing a very good job of sending that message or telling that story. So we all need to be mindful of that. But we at the county realized pretty early on during COVID that a lot of our employees didn't have to drive into work every day, and they could get their jobs done really well. And so we launched an initiative to make permanent a goal of having 75% of our eligible employees, meaning people who didn't physically have to be at work to do their jobs, telecommute or remote work on a permanent basis. And we are funding some of the consultant work that we're paying for to help put the structures in place to make that permanent, again, with these federal funds. And that has a direct impact on climate for us. We worked with ICLEI to do a baseline greenhouse gas inventory and determined that the number one source of our greenhouse gas emissions, which is true for most governments unless they have their own utility, our number one source was buildings and the energy used to heat and cool and keep the lights on in buildings. Number two was our vehicles, our employee commute and our fleet vehicles. So by adopting this goal of having 75% of our employees engage in remote work on a permanent basis, we have dramatically reduced our greenhouse gas emissions from our utility use in our buildings and very dramatically reduced it on our employee commute. And oh, by the way, we've documented an increase in productivity. People get to work faster when they don't have to be stuck in traffic driving to and from work every day. And they're happier. Employee morale has improved. And we've saved $1.3 million just in the first year on our utility bills. So this to me is an example of a lesson that we all learned during the early days of the pandemic that should be seriously considered to be adopted at every level of government and in every business place. So that's just one of the things that we're using some of that federal aid money for that is directly helping with climate.
Well, the city of Des Moines has looked at a lot of our climate risks and, you know, what are we doing and how are we going to try to mitigate it. And we have put a lot of that federal money into, for instance, public transportation. And public transportation, twofold: A, to get people off the streets and driving their own cars, but also to get electric buses. And so we're looking at doing some of that. We're putting solar on a lot of our city facilities, and a couple of them are, quite frankly, I'll proudly tell you all, are LEED Platinum buildings. And we also have adopted a measure that all of our buildings now, retrofit and new builds, have to be LEED Silver or better. So, thank you, thank you. But we also have to look at protecting and mitigating, because an awful lot of the people at most risk are those with the fewest amount of resources. And often they're living in areas that are subject to flooding because, oh, why? That's where the cheapest land is, and that's where they built houses. And of course, like I say, so many years ago, they didn't flood. But now they're seeing flooding, and not just once, but frequently. And so we're trying to see what we can do to, either buy them out and take them out of those places and say, we don't build. There are places where we shouldn't build that are not safe, regardless of how cheap it is. Or how do we put levees in place in ways to protect our city and our residents? And seeing what we can do in all areas to improve the quality of life for all of our citizens. And we also have dedicated a lot of money to homeless as well. Our homeless population is not as significant as it is in Austin, but it is significant, and those people need help. Whether it's the real extreme cold part of the year that we see, and as any of you that have attended any of our other sessions, we've seen 40 degrees below zero in Des Moines, Iowa. And at the same time, we'll see 110 degree on the other end. So we see both extremes. And so we have to have ways, and we're putting a notification system in place where those most vulnerable, we're going to let them know when those risks are going to occur, whether it's heat or it's flood or it's a tornado or it's a derecho, it's some storm event. We have to have ways to notify and let those most at risk know what it is, and then have heating centers that will help them in cold weather, extreme cold, cooling centers that will give them, and water resources if they don't have adequate source of fresh water during those real hot, humid times in Iowa. So we're trying to do and use some of these monies to accomplish some of these goals to protect not only our businesses, but our residents at all levels.
You know, we're trying to focus our efforts on our frontline communities, because this is not just about climate, it is about equity, it's also about health. And so I'm excited because I believe that the state of California has made some very strategic investments that we can now use as matching grants as we apply for the federal funding. Now, we have already been successful in getting federal funding to electrify and enhance battery storage at our port. And when we talk about equitable investments, electrifying port operations, and that means like the drayage trucks, all the cranes and gurneys that are actually on the terminals, that not only lowers emissions and obviously plugging the ships into electricity, it not only lowers the emissions for the climate, but it also reduces the pollution for the frontline communities that have truly borne the burden. And I mean asthma rates that are so immoral, the disparities between communities that live next to these heavy operations from which the entire country benefits. There is not a single state in all of the United States that does not have some good go through the Port of Oakland. So that is a huge priority, to reduce those port-generated emissions. The other thing that we're excited about that we see as a huge opportunity for the IRA is not only to invest more in our zero emission, I like to call it zero emission mobility, not just vehicle, because there is no lower emission than someone walking or biking. So let's not forget walking and biking along with, you know, electric cars. So we're excited about, you know, ramping up our work there. But Oakland, you know, we walk the talk. We have banned natural gas in all new construction in our city. You got to put that on your list. But the next big work is to take existing buildings, and particularly homes and apartment buildings in these frontline communities, and pay to convert them off of natural gas onto electricity. And not only does our emissions inventory work show that that would be one of the biggest gains for the climate, but I did not know this until a few years ago. Your indoor stove is one of the worst health, air pollutants inside your home. It's like burning, your fireplace and 1,200 candles at the same time. And it's hard for us to think of the stove, which cooks our meals and nourishes our children, as actually, something that is an affront to our respiratory health. But it turns out it is, and I think that conversion is one of the most urgent things that we can do with the new resources from the IRA.
You'd asked about relationship with the state. New Hampshire is well behind a lot of our New England neighbors in terms of, can you hear me? There we go. Okay, there we go. Let's start over. So you had asked about our relationship with the state. New Hampshire is well behind a lot of our New Hampshire neighbors, or New England neighbors, I should say, in terms of investments in energy efficiency, upping our renewable portfolio standard, things of that nature. So municipalities really have to push on their own, at least at this time. We certainly hope to change that. But it is a difficult policy environment in some ways to negotiate for our municipalities in New Hampshire. Nonetheless, one of the things that we've done recently is that we forged a net metering agreement with a small hydro producer within the city of Concord. It's important that that agreement exists because we want to be able to support local renewable energy generation within our borders. So that's very helpful to us. I would also say that the working with ICLEI and the tools that have been available to us have been extremely important, because we had, over the last couple of years, 2 students from UNH Sustainability Institute that, number one, produced a very usable greenhouse gas inventory for us, and then this past summer, using a lot of the ICLEI tools, really laid out options for our policymakers in terms of what would happen if we did X, Y, Z things. Like, for example, we've lost 30% of our tree cover in the city of Concord over the last 25 years. So one of the things that we are going to initiate is a enhanced tree planting program to get some of that tree cover back. We also, the greenhouse gas inventory really indicated that transportation, both for the municipality in terms of our fleet and for the community, transportation as a whole, were really the largest sources of emissions. So we have a lot of work to do in terms of our fleet as a city, but we're going to get on that this year and in future years. And the IRA and the infrastructure bill does have a lot of money for New Hampshire in terms of EV infrastructure. New Hampshire's a bit of a donut hole in New England in terms of the infrastructure. But again, I think these funds are going to help us remedy that and make some good impacts for Concord.
Thank you all very much. Two important, one very important point. If you are a city or local or regional government staff member and you didn't hear Commissioner Shea's argument she just put out there for you and your working conditions, working from home, and how that can reduce your local government's GHG emissions, you'll have to rewind. This is online, so you can check that out. But let's go to nature-based solutions here for a moment. And Mayor Schaaf, I'd like to turn to you. Rob, you were mentioning a little bit about tree canopy and use of funding for that. Mayor Schaaf, the destruction of our ecosystems and the climate crisis are inherently interconnected. And working in harmony with nature is often the best path to mitigating both biodiversity loss and climate impacts. Can you tell us a little bit about nature-based solutions that the city of Oakland has implemented?
Oh, thank you. You know, in 1991, I got one of those like nightmare calls. My family's home completely burned down in the Oakland Hills fire. It was called the Tunnel Fire. At the time, it was one of the most destructive fires in definitely California's history and one of the worst in the country. Nearly 4,000 homes lost. Today, in California, it's number 10. And in fact, numbers 1 through 5 have all been in just the last few years. The wildfire, I mean, so if we don't have a lesson that nature is one of the most powerful movers of climate on both ends of the scale, I think what California and really the whole Northwest has experienced with this rash of wildfires is a very, very powerful message for all of us. So in Oakland, one thing I wish the federal government was doing was something that California has done through its Transformative Climate Communities program. So the state of California actually is giving grants to frontline communities to actually envision what a sustainable climate solution would look like for their communities. And I am so proud that a community in deep East Oakland, again, one of our most impacted communities, won one of those planning grants and then won the implementation grant. And again, it shows the wisdom of frontline communities because nearly all of their solutions were nature-based. East Oakland is definitely a heat island, and one of their very top priorities is to literally plant thousands of street trees in this very urban center. The other thing that I think is, as we say in Oakland, hella cool, is that they are going to create the largest aquaponics farm in a city in the country. So they're going to actually be creating their own food right there in like the middle of deep East Oakland through aquaponics farming. So again, another nature-based solution to create not only, you know, a circular economy, but again, better health. So those are some great examples of nature-based solutions, but I really want to underscore they came from that frontline community, their wisdom, their priorities, and that's what they chose.
Thank you, Mayor Schaaf. Well, Mayor County, please tell us about some of the hella cool nature-based solutions that you are implementing in Des Moines, Iowa.
Well, we'll move on now beyond trees. Is this okay? Anybody hear this? Hello? Hello? We're doing better now. We also are looking at food sources and what is it that we can do for all of our community. And the city of Des Moines, although it's not one of the largest communities in the country, we've got 77 parks. And we have an additional park with our water department, our waterworks, that is 1,500 acres. So we're looking at ways to use some of this land to provide more opportunity for our citizens to have gardens and help them find ways and, quite frankly, educate them. We've got Iowa State University that's not too far away from us, and their outreach program is working with master gardeners to take some of this education out to our community and show people how they can plant gardens to feed themselves, to feed their families. And as we look at sometimes our stressed use of the agricultural land around Iowa, I will remind everybody that Iowa has about 30 million acres of farm ground. Of that farm ground, almost all of it is committed to, well, I'd say about 25, 26 million acres to corn and soybeans, none of which is table food for anybody to eat. And quite frankly, there are those that think that ethanol is a renewable fuel. And that's what they commit most of the corn to. You know, there's part of me and part of our education of our people in the city of Des Moines, and oh, by the way, working with our Des Moines public school system, they're teaching the kids in the school, in many of the elementary schools, they're planting gardens in and around their schools to show kids how they can do it, and hopefully they'll take that information home to their families to be able to pass it on to the rest of the family and produce yet more food. But I'm concerned that back to what Iowa does, you know, here we have all these acres, and we, with chickens, with pork and livestock, we produce maybe 10 to 15% of the food that goes on the table. The rest of it comes from somewhere else. So that's one of the reasons why we're looking at some of these regenerative food sources to raise in our community, to bring that back to our community to raise our own food. And we also are looking at using greenhouses and doing that in a neighborhood setting to see if it works. And we're working with the, again, not only with our homeless shelter in Des Moines that has just created a yet bigger one, greenhouse, and we're going to use our city greenhouse as we're building a new one and convert that with these Iowa State University Master Gardeners to take that one and move it to food production in our community as well. So in addition to those trees we talked about earlier, those are some of the things we're doing.
Thank you, Mayor County. Commissioner Shea, so in Travis County's quest to reach net zero emissions, is there a nature-based solution that you are implementing that every community can also implement, in your opinion?
We've got a couple of unique features which may not translate to a lot of other communities, but I think we can sort of double or triple dip on them. We have a lot of groundwater in central Texas that is a source of our springs. It's also a major source of our rivers, so it contributes to our groundwater. And a lot of people get well water from that groundwater. So we have embarked on a plan that we've taken to the voters, and they've voted to approve millions in bond money. Can y'all hear over this? Okay. Millions in bond money to purchase conservation easements and purchase land outright to protect the groundwater and these natural springs. So in addition to preserving and protecting that land, I would like to see us look at practicing regenerative soil practices so that that soil can also absorb more carbon. And we also have a program where we're working with immigrant groups that have come from agricultural societies and allowing them to farm on that land and then sell the produce so they can earn revenue and also feed their families. So I think there's multiple ways to use those kinds of public lands, and the community's been very supportive in approving literally tens of millions of dollars in bonds over a series of many years for us to buy these lands and permanently set them aside.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Shea. Well, if you're watching online, maybe you're getting a flavor of the COP, and you can maybe hear some of the chanting in the background, which makes it fun to be at these kind of events. And thank you to our panelists for speaking through all of the life that is breathing that we're all living here at the COP. I'd like to turn to another question here as we listen to our friends chanting in the background. Climate stakeholders at COP27 are being instructed to take stock of the progress that they are making on their climate plans. When we come together for COP28 next year, what do you hope will have happened to get emission reductions on track? Why don't we start at the other end with Mr. Warner?
Well, what we're going to do in Concord actually by Earth Day is we're going to have a local stock take in Concord, and Concord will be an early adopter of this initiative, and we're very happy to be able to do that. I can't tell you all the forms that it will take, but I can tell you it will be very community-based. That's important because when we adopted our 100% renewable energy goal, we spent a lot of time reaching out to the community in terms of having meetings with all types of various stakeholders as well as community forums in each of the wards of our city. We have 10 wards in Concord. So we went to the community and asked them what they thought was important to be part of our plan. And the stock take that we planned for the spring, I think will be a really great opportunity to re-engage the community. Not only neighborhoods and community organizations, but some of our major employers, such as the hospital, school system, and so forth. One of the things I will say too, and as well as the business community, because when we passed our renewable energy resolution, we reached out to the local Chamber of Commerce, the Greater Concord Chamber of Commerce, and we engaged them. And they had a lot of questions in terms of what this resolution would mean for them, in terms of the business community. But ultimately, they came to support it. They supported the resolution and continue to do so unanimously at the board of directors, and the president of the chamber came to city council and spoke in favor of these kinds of efforts. So I really look forward to putting that and working with a large group of people to put that initiative together. I do think that the solar initiatives that I mentioned is going to be a real part of that. Our mayor told me last week that these installations that I mentioned, he really wants them up and running by a year from now. So that is our goal, and we're going to work hard to make that goal.
Well, I have to use the goals as a way to brag on some accomplishments. So in our last measurement, we've reduced air pollution by 60%. I'd like to see that even higher. And notice I don't say GHGs, right? Like, we need to talk in the language that our people understand. And so GHGs, that you sciencey nerds all know what that means. But a mother knows about pollution and how that is keeping her child home from school, requiring her to bring that child to the emergency room, be afraid every day that that child goes out to play sports. So I hope to see even more pollution reductions, and yes, that does mean GHGs. I'm also really proud that in our last year, you know, Oakland was a very early city to have curbside compost pickup. And we all have our little stinky pails in our kitchens. We celebrate them. I tell people if it's too stinky, put it in your freezer. It takes the smell away. So we've been doing pretty good on getting towards our zero waste goals. But what I'm really proud of that we started this year was actually saving food waste and bringing it to people who are hungry, who are food insecure. This year, we actually delivered almost 1 million pounds of food that was destined for the compost, but was so much better spent by feeding people in need. So I'd love to see that number doubled. Got it, Daniel? Doubled. All right, and then help me on this number. I think it's $185 million that we have, that our community choice aggregation aggregator that we call East Bay Community Energy, 175. I was $10 million off. That was really close. $175 million that would have gone to our, you know, corporate utility, PG&E, they're lovely community partners. But just think, $175 million did not go to this company. Instead, it was reinvested in our community. It saved our consumers not just money, but also emissions because their energy was so much cleaner. That is a huge win. I would love to see that number go up. So those are some of the things I'd like to see.
Thank you. Mayor County.
So the city of Des Moines has, we've been looking at this. We have a plan in place that we call ADAPT DSM. And we have looked at, or trying to look at every aspect and get all kinds of input from our city and our residents. We've gone to neighborhood meetings. We've brought them to our central library. We've talked about what the risks are, what's going on in our city. We want their ideas on what can happen. I will tell you that a few years ago we had a little bit of a disagreement with the distributed energy company, Mid-American Energy, and a couple of others in the state of Iowa, and we lobbied very hard to block the construction because there was a huge need for more electricity in the state of Iowa, blocked the construction of new coal plants. So they did, we blocked them, and so Berkshire Hathaway, with the Obama administration and now with the Biden administration, has taken advantage of some of those tax credits, and they have invested billions of dollars in wind energy. And so we are proud to say, as we have forged a ever-improving relationship with this distributed energy group, we are now at 85% of our grid is renewable off of wind. Now, we also were one of the first cities in the United States, I would like to say first, but listening to what's going on in Oakland, maybe they beat us on it, but we committed to 100% of that renewable energy on our grid by 2035. So we are on the way, and as I say, we're close to it. They're still trying to figure out what they do when the wind is not blowing and the sun isn't shining and how they store it. And so those storage facilities are very, very expensive, and so the prices are coming down, but we're going to see that happen as well. And so also back to, you know, how people are moving around, I am now forced to tell you we're one of the best cities in the country with bike paths and jogging paths connecting all those parks and keeping every resident in the city of Des Moines within 10 minutes of either a bike path or a park. And we have we connect to paths, bike paths, safe bike paths, so where they're not motor vehicles driving up and down, cars and trucks and whatever, not just lanes on the street, but off the street to about 300 miles north, south, east, west, so you can get in and out of our city on a bike or walking or jogging using your feet as opposed to a vehicle. And so we're proud of that, been building that and trying to extend that, and we're going to do it some more as we try to complete our goals. So they're just, in addition to some of the things we talked about before, some of the other things that we're doing in our city as we look at the future and try to lay a solid foundation today that can carry on to future generations in our city.
Thank you, Mayor County. Commissioner Shea, as you look forward to COP28, what do you hope for Travis County and where it will be?
Well, in addition to Travis County, I do think at a structural level, these UN gatherings have to take the work of local governments much more seriously. And because I think it's clear that the nations of the world can't do this on their own. And I think for a long time, local governments, aside from the enlightened folks who are all here, haven't really thought of themselves as key players on the stage of saving the planet from climate disaster. And so I think we really have to change that whole conversation and make clear local governments are essential. This problem requires all hands on deck. And I'd love to see that message get conveyed more powerfully from the leadership of the UN and the leadership of the nations on down. And then I think, and I see the Biden administration doing this with a lot of their programs, but I think you could have a structure where the nations incentivize their local governments to take actions, and then have the methodology down flat so that everybody understood, okay, here's how you measure your local greenhouse gas reduction, pollution reduction. You're right, talk about it in common language. Here's how you measure it. Here's how you document it. So everybody's clear on it, and there's no fudging the numbers. But to have that be a very clear expectation, and if people feel like, well, you can't make us do that, you're not the boss of me or whatever, then make it an incentive program where they get paid, or they get more federal support, or they get benefits that are equal to that task. So I'd love to see that develop between now and the next COP. I just feel like there's not an expectation. It's like if you don't expect your kids to, excel or do well, maybe they don't do as well because there isn't that expectation. I think there needs to be a clear expectation that local governments have to step up and do their part. And then at Travis County level, I'd love to see us and any other local governments make better use of ICLEI's Cities with Nature tool. It's the only resource that's widely, freely available, the Cities with Nature website, that provides technical support and information for any local government or national government to do more with nature, essentially. And honestly, every city, every county, every state has parks, has green space, has open space, and we could all be making those lands much more of a carbon sink and having much more of a profound impact on helping basically reinstate carbon back into the soil and take it out of the atmosphere. So I'd love to see that made more of a widespread campaign. I think it would benefit everyone.
Thank you, Commissioner Shea. Well, it's dangerous to stand between an audience and food and drinks, which is just around the corner. If you can hang on with us for a few more minutes. I want to thank the panel for a really fun discussion. If you couldn't feel a little bit of the competitive energy between some of these local governments, I sure did, but it's a good kind of competitive energy, and that's what we need to tackle the climate crisis. We need some competition, some good old-fashioned competition between these cities, and that's where we're getting it done. So part of competition is taking stock of where you are, and I'd like to invite Cale Roberts, who's ICLEI's Senior Program Officer, up to the stage for a few moments to tell us a little bit about the stock take process. Cale.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you to our elected leaders here on the stage. Let's give them another round of applause. Awesome. I loved this question that Dan kind of closed with about, envision where you want to be in a year from now when we're coming to COP28. And all of us in the room here have been very fortunate, really quite privileged to have the opportunity to come to an event like this in Sharm el-Sheikh and bring the voice of our constituencies, whoever they might be. But there is an opportunity in the year ahead to take COP home to each and every one of our communities. And that is called the Paris Agreement Local Stocktake. This phrase, local stocktake, or you might hear global stocktake, is an official mandated process in the Paris Agreement. Every 5 years, nations, countries, are called to take stock of where we are at on meeting the goals of Paris, on securing a future that is warmed by no more than 1.5 degrees. We are in this global stocktake moment right now. It runs from this year all the way through COP28 next year. But not only that, in Bonn this year, in Bonn, Germany, in June, there's what's called an intersessional. It's essentially the midpoint between COPs. And the UNFCCC decided that this global stocktake could and should be a local level process as well. And any city in the world can now open a pathway to direct conversation with the UNFCCC. Your community can showcase these kinds of actions that we heard today and how they contribute to upholding the NDC or the Paris Agreement goal for your nation. Any city, no matter how big or small, can do this process. So here at COP27, Earth Day Network and ICLEI USA, we're very proud to announce that we've created a resource kit to help any of your communities host your own local stocktake at any point next year, with a key moment being Earth Day 2023. So we've got your PowerPoint slides, your meeting agendas, your activities that you can do with your local community, and really make this a whole of society or community-wide process. I appreciated much of these panelists speaking to say that, you know, business, youth, the healthcare sector, they're all important climate actors, and they have a role in this local stocktake process. So I invite all of you, I invite all of our panelists to commit to having a stock-taking event in their community on Earth Day next year, and really just appreciate all the inspiring stories that are kind of leading us to that moment. So thank you all again for being here, and thank you to our panelists. Have an incredible rest of your day here at COP.
Thank you so much, Cale, and thank you to all of our panelists. Once again, let's have another round of applause for such an incredible discussion here today. After hearing your words of wisdom and all of the knowledge that you've shared between each other and between all of us, it is clear to me now more than ever that local leaders need to be at the forefront of taking stock on our progress of reaching our climate goals and accelerate the transition to a sustainable and equitable future. Our leaders here today demonstrated that it's truly our local authorities who have the greatest ability to take action to address the climate crisis, to take action to create a happier, healthier, and wealthier future for their constituents. I was inspired by your conversation today, how your administrations are working to improve mobility and transportation and to lead by example to create greater energy efficiency, starting with our institutions and spreading that out to our community and to major stakeholders within them. All of this work evidently has been approached with the community itself in mind, with the concepts of justice and equity at the forefront, making sure that these are not just actions that are taken to benefit environment and abstract, but to create true prosperity for these communities. The solutions that you've put forth today are truly innovative. With all this in mind, I need to reiterate, not only to those here in this room, but to any leaders watching along here at home, that local leaders, you are in the position to have the immense capacity to take action to build a healthy, happy, and wealthy society for all people, especially considering that most of us are living in urban areas these days. We can make the most progress the fastest with the least amount of friction when we start at the local level. This Earth Day, I encourage you all to host your official stocktake events to assess your city's progress towards this future and make a solid investment in our planet. In choosing Earth Day to rally for the stocktake process, you will have both time to prepare for an excellent event and have ample time to make progress on your new goals ahead of COP28. I can't wait to see these landmarks take shape over the course of the next year, because the world cannot wait to see what you all accomplish. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of COP27. Right now, we'll be commencing a reception for any and all of you who are interested in uniting with us for Earth Day. I can't wait to continue the discussion with everyone. Have an excellent night, everybody.